Max Verstappen finally names the 5 greatest F1 drivers of all time. Max Verstappen named 5 drivers, and when you line them up side by side, there's a pattern. One he never explained. One he may not even be fully aware of himself. But it's there, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Max Verstappen does not hand out compliments. This is not an opinion. It's a documented behavioral pattern. Watch any post-race interview after a dominant win. The face doesn't change. The voice doesn't lift. He processes victory the way most people process a grocery run, efficiently, without ceremony. He walked into Formula One at 17 years old and treated every world champion on the grid like a variable to be neutralized. Not respected. Neutralized. Fernando Alonso, 2 championships, one of the most decorated careers in the sport's history, was a rookie obstacle in Max's mind before the second corner of his very first race. So when this man sits down and voluntarily names 5 drivers as the greatest in Formula One history, something unusual is happening. This isn't a press conference deflection. This isn't brand management. Max Verstappen does not perform admiration, which means every name on that list is a window directly into how he thinks. 5 names, pulled from across 8 decades of Formula One. Different eras, different machines, different worlds. On the surface, it looks like the kind of list any serious fan could produce. Historical, respectable, defensible. But there's a thread running through all 5 of them, a single quality. And Max never named it out loud. We're going to name it for him. Number 5, Ayrton Senna. Go ahead. Roll your eyes. Every driver picks Senna. It's the romantic answer, the cinematic answer, the answer that signals you understand what Formula One is actually about beneath the lap times and the strategy calls. Except, here is the first clue. When Max talked about Senna, he didn't mention the rain. He didn't mention Monaco. He didn't mention the image of a man in a yellow helmet, pressing his hands together in prayer on the starting grid. Those are the details that move fans. Max is not a fan. He talked about qualifying. Specifically, he talked about what Senna did to his competitors before a single racing lap had been completed. Senna claimed 65 pole positions across his career. In race after race, his qualifying lap was so far beyond what the machinery should have been capable of that the engineers in rival teams would pull the data apart, looking for the explanation. They would check his setup, model his lines, review his fuel load, and find nothing. Because the explanation wasn't in the car. It was in what Senna was able to do inside his own mind during those 20 minutes on a Saturday afternoon. A mental state so complete, so separated from everything outside the cockpit, that it produced lap times his own teammates, in identical equipment, simply could not reach. Rubens Barrichello said it plainly years later. There were laps Senna produced where the car was not the difference, something else was. His rivals arrived on the grid Sunday morning already knowing this. They had seen the gap. They had failed to explain it. And they had spent Saturday night with that failure sitting quietly in the back of their minds. Senna didn't just win races. He contaminated the psychology of the people he was racing against before the race had started. That's the first thread. Remember it. Number 4, Jim Clark. If the name doesn't immediately mean something to you, that's not a failure of knowledge. It's a failure of the sport's storytelling. Jim Clark does not have a Netflix series. He does not have a rivalry that became a film. He died in 1968 at 32 years old on a minor Formula 2 circuit in Germany on a Sunday afternoon, and the cause of his accident has never been definitively established. He left no dramatic final chapter. no retirement speech, no legacy tour. What he left was a record that still makes people stop and recalculate. In 72 Formula One starts, Jim Clark won 25 races. That is a win rate approaching 35%. In his peak years, he was not merely winning, he was constructing races in which the result felt predetermined from the moment the lights went out. Leading from the front, lapping the field, making the Lotus beneath him do things that Lotus's own engineers could not fully account for when they reviewed the data. But this is not why Max chose him. The reason Max chose Jim Clark is something quieter and stranger and more revealing. It's what Clark's contemporaries said about him. Not fans, not journalists, his competitors. Graham Hill, himself a world champion, a man with no professional incentive to mythologize a rival, said watching Clark drive produced a particular kind of disorientation. Not intimidation, disorientation. As though the rules of what was physically achievable behind a steering wheel were different for Clark than they were for everyone else. Jack Brabham, who built his own car, won his own championships, who was as technically grounded as any driver who ever raced, said something almost identical. That Clark appeared to be operating on a different frequency. That there were corners where Clark's car did things that Brabham's car, with the same tires, the same track, the same conditions, could not be made to do. Max Verstappen chose a driver who made world champions feel like they were missing a fundamental piece of information about reality. The thread is pulling tighter, but it's still not fully visible. Number 3. Michael Schumacher. This is the only name on the list that Max discusses with something different in his voice. Not awe, not analysis, something closer to recognition. The way you might talk about someone who solved a problem the same way you would have solved it, if you'd existed 40 years earlier and driven for Ferrari. 7 world championships. 91 race wins. Records that stood for over a decade, several of which required Lewis Hamilton's entire career to surpass. The most statistically dominant driver the sport had produced before the current era. But Max didn't choose Schumacher for the championships. He chose him for what Schumacher did to the teams he drove for. When Schumacher arrived at Ferrari in 1996, he inherited an organization that was equal parts genius and catastrophe. The passion was real, the history was real, the talent in the building was real, but the execution, the ability to convert all of that potential into a reliable, repeatable, championship-winning machine, was broken. Ferrari had not won a Constructors' Championship in over a decade. Schumacher didn't wait for the team to improve around him. He went into the factory. He learned the engineering language. He built relationships with the technical staff that went far beyond what any driver before him had attempted. He made himself the center of gravity around which every other element of the operation had to orient. Not through ego, through obsession. He turned an entire Formula One team into a precision instrument, pointed at a single outcome. And then, when the instrument was ready, after 4 years of construction, he used it to win 5 consecutive world championships. Max Verstappen has spent his career reshaping Red Bull racing around his own feedback. The car's balance, the engineering philosophy, the way the team approaches a race weekend, all of it has been gradually realigned around what Max needs. Engineers who have worked with other drivers describe it as unusual, not difficult. Unusual. Like working with someone who has already mapped the entire system and knows exactly which variables to change. He picked the man who invented that approach. Something is emerging now. Something about how these 5 drivers understood the boundaries of what they were doing and what they chose to do about those boundaries. Number 2. Juan Manuel Fangio, born in 1911 in Balcarce, Argentina. Didn't arrive in European racing until his late 30s. Won his first Formula One World Championship at 40 years old, an age at which most drivers have already spent a decade in retirement. Won 5 in total, across 4 different constructors, in an era where the cars were not only desperately underpowered compared to modern machinery, but actively dangerous in ways that are difficult to fully communicate today. Fangio drove in a period when drivers died, not occasionally, regularly. His peer group was destroyed across the 1950s. The sport consumed men the way industrial processes consume materials. And Fangio, older than almost everyone he raced against, competing in machinery that was one mechanical failure from a fatal accident at any given moment, won 24 of his 51 starts and retired at 47, voluntarily, at a moment of his own choosing. But the race Max mentioned, the one he brought up without being asked, without any prompt from the interviewer, was the 1957 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Fangio was running a strategy that required an early pit stop. The stop went wrong, slow, mechanical, a matter of seconds that became tens of seconds. He rejoined the race in third place, more than 45 seconds behind the two leaders, with 9 laps remaining on a circuit that was 16 miles long. In the next 9 laps, Fangio broke the lap record, then broke it again, then broke it again. 9 consecutive laps, each one faster than anything he had ever driven at the Nürburgring, each one faster than any lap ever recorded there by anyone. He passed both leaders. He won the race by 3 seconds. Afterwards, he was asked how he had done it. He said, "I had to drive beyond my own limits, not the car's limits, his own." He knew with complete precision where those limits were. He had spent a career calibrating them, understanding them, working within them with extraordinary efficiency. And on those 9 laps, with 45 seconds to recover and the race slipping away, he made a conscious choice, not an instinctive one, a deliberate one, to go past them. A man who understood the edge so completely that he could choose to step over it. 4 drivers now, and something is almost fully formed. One more name, and then you'll see exactly what Max Verstappen values, and what it tells you about him. Before the last name, stop. Senna, who could access a mental state so complete that his competitors couldn't follow him there. Clark, who made world champions feel as though they were missing a fundamental understanding of what driving was. Schumacher, who rebuilt an entire organization around a singular obsession and then used it as a weapon. Fangio, who understood his own limits with such precision that he could choose consciously to exceed them. What do these 4 men share? Not speed. Speed is the minimum requirement. Everyone in Formula One history is fast. Speed does not distinguish the names on this list from the hundreds of other fast drivers who raced and won and retired and were forgotten. The thing these 4 men share is this: they each understood the full system they were operating within: the car, the team, the competition, their own mind, at a level of depth that their contemporaries could not match. And they used that understanding not just to be better, but to make their rivals feel the gap. To make the gap psychological as well as physical. They didn't just win. They made losing feel inevitable to the people losing. Which brings us to the #1 driver on Max Verstappen's list. The man who perfected that quality, who turned it into something so refined, so methodical, that it didn't just beat rivals. It dismantled them from the inside. Alain Prost, the professor, 4 world championships, 51 race wins. The highest win rate of any driver with more than 100 starts in Formula One history at the time of his retirement. A career spanning 16 seasons, across the most dangerous and then the most competitive eras the sport had seen, and the most strategically complete racing driver who ever sat in a Formula One cockpit. Prost did not look like a racing driver in the way that phrase is usually meant. He didn't have Senna's visible intensity. He didn't have Schumacher's predatory focus. He sat in the car and he looked almost comfortable, methodical, unhurried, like a man assembling something he had already assembled 100 times before. That was the weapon. Prost walked into every race weekend with the entire event already mapped in his mind. The tire degradation curve across 70 laps, the fuel consumption window, and exactly when it would become a strategic variable. The point, somewhere between lap 30 and lap 45, depending on the circuit, where his competitor, if he had been managing them correctly for the first half of the race, would make a mistake. Not a mechanical mistake, a psychological one. Because Prost's method was not simply to drive faster than you. It was to drive in a way that made you drive faster than you should. To run at a pace that sat just close enough to your limit that you couldn't afford to let him go. But that was slightly, invisibly more sustainable than what you were doing to stay with him. To push you into degrading your tires 2 laps before the window closed. To force you to pit first. To make you feel the urgency of a race that he was, in reality, completely in control of. He won races without ever being the fastest driver on the track. He won races by engineering the race around him until there was no other result possible. And then came Ayrton Senna. When Senna and Prost became teammates at McLaren in 1988, something happened that had never happened in Formula One before. Senna, the man who could enter mental states his opponents couldn't access, who had already broken teammates with the sheer inexplicability of his qualifying pace, met someone who didn't try to follow him there. Prost didn't chase Senna's mental territory. He built his own, different, colder, more architectural, and Senna became obsessed with it. The man who was never rattled began to look rattled. The man who was never political became political. The man whose greatest quality was a focus so total it excluded everything outside the car found himself unable to exclude Prost, found himself changing his approach, his strategy, his race management, not based on the race, but based on what Prost was doing. Prost had not beaten Senna with speed. He had built a psychological structure around Senna's greatest strength and made that strength work against him. 1989, Suzuka. Prost turns in on Senna at the chicane and takes them both out. Prost wins the championship. 1990, Suzuka again. Senna drives into Prost at the first corner and takes them both out. Senna wins the championship. 2 of the most gifted drivers in the history of the sport, reduced to removing each other from races because neither had found any other way to resolve what was between them. Prost had constructed a rivalry so psychologically consuming that it changed the behavior of a man who had previously been immune to psychological pressure. Max Verstappen chose this man as the greatest Formula One driver who ever lived. Now you see the pattern. Senna contaminated the psychology of rivals before the race began. Clark made world champions question their own understanding of the sport. Schumacher rebuilt an entire organization around the singular pursuit of a single outcome. Fangio understood his own limits so completely that he could choose to exceed them with full awareness and full control. And Prost did all of it simultaneously, calmly, methodically, without ever appearing to try. The thread connecting all 5 men is not speed. It is not talent in the conventional sense. It is not even winning, though all 5 of them won at a rate that suggests something beyond ordinary excellence. The thread is this. Every driver on this list understood the total system around them: the car, the team, the race, the competition, their own mind, at a depth that their contemporaries could not reach. And they used that understanding to make the experience of racing against them feel fundamentally different from racing against anyone else. Not harder. Different, as though a different game were being played within the same race. Max Verstappen has won 4 world championships. He has reshaped a championship team around his feedback. He has produced qualifying laps that his teammates cannot explain. He has managed races from the front, with a composure that makes his margins look larger than the data suggests they should be. He did not choose 5 drivers he admires. He chose 5 drivers he is studying. There is one name missing from this list, a driver still active, still accumulating. The holder of records that Fangio, Clark, Senna, Schumacher, and Prost never reached. A driver who, by almost every statistical measure, is the most accomplished in the history of the sport. Max Verstappen did not name Lewis Hamilton. He was not asked about the omission. He did not explain it. The list ended at 5, and Hamilton was not among them. Whether that is a statement about what Max values, a statement about rivalry, or simply the kind of deliberate silence that speaks more clearly than any answer, that is for you to decide.